Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Assailed from all sides, these are not encouraging times for the British Brexiteers. The Irish question remains unresolved, the Lords are revolting, the Tory party is split, the Scots are rebelling, and cabinet members are threatening resignation. Today we ask the question, has Brexit hit the buffers? But first to Alex, with your tweets, your messages and your emails.
Well, still lots of reaction to the series we did on shipbuilding. Barbara Reid says, a brilliant show. Well done everyone involved. A success story for shipbuilding at Port Glasgow. And Jeff Proven adds, fantastic. Thank you for a most professional, in-depth programme. Ferguson's deserves to lead the world in hydrogen shipping. And Sturi Fitz says, Ferguson Marine was absolutely fantastic, a metaphor for a future Scotland. And Bob, such an encouraging show on Ferguson's shipbuilding renewal. Great to see and listen to the young apprentices. But he adds he's a bit worried when you were interviewing the edge of what looked like a rising tide. Yes, indeed, Bob, the tide was rising, but we got out just in time. And finally, James Doonan. Alex Salmond, an excellent interviewer on the show, giving each person a time to answer without interruption. You're quite right, James. Unlike that Tasmina, I mean, she never lets them get a word in edgeways.
On paper, it seemed business as usual for Theresa May's government over the last 2 weeks. Tory party splits, threatened resignations and the prospect of being overturned in the Commons. However, by hook or by crook, and some assistance from the Labour Party leadership, the government held the line, albeit with a little blurring at the edges. However, Brexit lives to fight another day, but the feeling of impending crisis is growing, and the anti-Brexit forces may yet overwhelm the Prime Minister. Today we examine these forces and question whether they can halt the Brexit bus. First up is the House of Lords. The watchdog of the Constitution has been barking decisively on the Brexit bill with a series of key government defeats in the upper chamber. Here's a taster of recent debate.
Our proposed amendment creates a formal structure set out in law for Parliament to express its views in all of the various outcomes that might come to pass in our exit from the EU.
It is in the national interest that Parliament should not be faced by just a take it or leave it vote. That's not just some arcane interest. There's a lot of ordinary citizens who'd be hugely harmed, including those who voted for Brexit.
The Lords have hit the ball into the Commons, where the government's precarious majority has only been sustained by some flexible promises to anti-Brexiteers and some convenient abstentions from Labour. Alex asked former Downing Street spokesman and anti-Brexit campaigner Alastair Campbell to assess the situation.
Alastair Campbell, the Prime Minister's surrounded by enemies, the House of Lords, the Brexit Committee, rebellious backbenchers, splits in her cabinet, the Scots are rebelling as well. She still hasn't solved the Irish question. So how is she still Prime Minister?
I think she does have a certain quality of resilience, and she does seem able just to kind of keep going. I think that's the one thing I'll give her. But also I think the Conservative Party now and this place, they're so divided that I don't think anybody can work out quite what would happen next should she fall. Should she either fall just because the politics drive her out, fall in a vote of confidence? I don't think that's going to happen. But I just think people are worried about what would come next on both sides. So you've got the one thing I think the Tory Party, you know this, the Tory Party has always had this sense of kind of its own survival. They don't really care about who the leader is as long as the party survives. And I think they understand that. I think this is a bad thing, but she is driven so profoundly by the idea of holding the Conservative Party together. And I think her party sort of gets that.
But how about the pressure outside Parliament, the marches, the People's Vote campaign? Is that coming to a head? Is that electrifying the atmosphere, or are people across the country as confused and divided as the Parliament is?
No, there's no doubt the public are confused, are divided, just as this place is. I think the one thing that the government is really trying to play on, and with some success, is this sort of fatalism. Let's just get on with it. And I think the thing it's really important for people to understand is that let's just get on with it leads to, in my view, the country doing the wrong thing and at considerable cost. Now, what I'd like to happen is that people's vote on the deal, because it's so different to what was promised. We know so much more than we did. And I think more and more people are just thinking, you know, why are we doing this when it appears clear that it's going to damage us for some time to come?
But a government which is having some difficulty defining a meaningful vote for MPs, are they seriously going to offer one to the people?
if you're speaking to Theresa May now, and you're watching her, observing her, you'd say no. However, I think that what's happening, I mean, look, Alex, we're 2 years on from the referendum. That's half an Olympiad. The next World Cup will be almost ready by the time that you've had the time that we've had to sort Brexit. And as you say, we still haven't sorted the Irish question. So I think anything can happen, I really do. And I'll tell you what, I honestly think from the Labour Party's perspective as well, I think if the Labour Party actually said, do you know what, we've looked at this every which way, there's no way this can be done without damaging the people that we represent. And if he turned on that, I think Labour would be home and dry an election. Whereas at the moment, this government, useless as it is, divided as it is, incompetent as it is, they're ahead in the polls.
The attempt this week to make reality out of the double-decker bus promise in the health service, how do you assess that as a political move?
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, the one thing, I think we're in a completely different era in politics. I mean, look, you and I have both been accused many, many times of kind of, pushing the truth, being too hard, being too aggressive, whatever. But this is something of a completely different order. This is where people, knowing something to be untrue, knowing something to have been exposed as being untrue, feel the confidence to be able to go on television and say it. And that's Theresa May. We're not talking about Boris Johnson here, we're talking about Theresa May. And I think, I'm afraid, it's straight out of the sort of Trump-Putin playbook. It's basically whatever you say, that is the truth at that time. And the actual factual situation kind of doesn't matter. Now, I think that's a very dangerous game to play, and I was genuinely surprised that Theresa May played it.
Alastair Campbell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now back to Tasmania.
Now, the opposition has difficulty uniting, but then so does the cabinet. The last few weeks have been full of more Foreign Secretary clangers and threatened resignations. However, the government can depend on one set of reliable allies, the Democratic Unionist Party. Alex asked leading DUP MP Sammy Wilson whether that support was unconditional.
Sammy Wilson, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Now, the Prime Minister doesn't have her problems to seek. She's got the House of Lords, the Brexit Committee, rebels in her backbenches, divided cabinet, the Scots are revolting. Her only friends are the DUP. How unconditional is your support?
Well, as you will know, all support in the House of Commons is conditional. Nobody gives a blank cheque to the government or to the opposition or indeed to anyone they're working with. And we have made it quite clear that as far as we're concerned, our support is conditional on Northern Ireland being treated the same as the rest of the United Kingdom. We're a unionist party.
Now, after the warning shot across the bows last Christmas, when she was trying to get a deal and seemed to be departing from that principle, are you convinced the Prime Minister is now fully on board with what you require?
Well, I think that first of all, last Christmas was an indication to the Prime Minister that our support is conditional, and indeed I think we probably rescued her from her own folly at that particular time, because of course she had signed up to something which would have had implications not just for Northern Ireland, but I imagine Scotland would have been saying, well, if you can treat Northern Ireland differently, we had the same outcome in the referendum as Northern Ireland had. We want a different treatment, and London would have said the same, and she'd have had her whole strategy in a shambles. But since then, of course, I think the Prime Minister is cognizant of the fact that she needs our support. She has made promises in the House of Commons that Northern Ireland will not be treated differently. And I think if one looks at her arrangements now for the backstop, which is a UK-wide arrangement, it's an indication that she will not make the same mistake again.
Well, 2 years in after the referendum, there still doesn't seem to be a definitive solution to the question of a frictionless border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Do you think that solution's in sight, or do you think it's going to elude the Prime Minister?
Well, I think that the solution was in sight a long time ago. It wasn't that there wasn't a solution. The question is there the political will on the part of the European Union and the Irish government to adopt a solution which allows for a frictionless border? And, you know, it's our view that the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic is actually quite easy to sort out. The real issue for the Irish should be, how do you make sure that you're not cut off from your main market in GB, or not find your land bridge across GB to Europe disrupted? How close are we to a solution? Unless by some accident Either she decides to step down, or she finds that there are massive vote against her, which people hadn't actually planned for. I think that she will survive, but it will be, I'm sure she's getting up every morning wondering, what have I let myself in for? If she bites her nails, there wouldn't be too many of them left, but I suspect that she wants to survive, and she probably will.
With that bit of analysis, Sammy, thank you so much for the interview. And now over to Tasmania.
If the government didn't have enough problems, a new threat emerged last week as the SNP parliamentary group boiled over about what they see as a power grab and promised to play Parnell with Westminster on Brexit. Alex spoke to SNP's Tommy Sheppard and Plaid Cymru's Hywel about the threat to Brexit from the other Celtic nations.
I'm joined by Tommy Sheppard from the Scottish National Party and Hywel, who sits on the Brexit committee for Plaid Cymru. Hey, Tommy Sheppard, are you really upset about this, or is it just a parliamentary game, some sort of pantomime that you were acting out last week?
No games here, Alec. This is stuff that really affects people. It affects the people I represent. And of course, last week, the reason why we made a protest was because we were denied. For my first time in this parliament, we were denied the opportunity to even discuss major proposals that will affect the lives of the people I was elected to represent. If I'm unable to do that, then I think I'm failing in my political responsibility to the people who voted for me to not protest about it. And I hope the government's learned its lesson from the shenanigans of last week and it won't try and do that again. But having said that, I very much doubt it.
Hywel, you sit on the Brexit committee, which again has not been friendly to the government. What's your assessment of the debate this week about what represents a meaningful vote for members of Parliament when the negotiations are done and dusted?
Well, for the government, meaningful seems to be a bit elastic, really. They've changed their minds a number of times. But the people who are promoting this are very clear. It's to restore sovereignty to Parliament, to the House of Commons, something that people campaigned for when they wanted to leave the European Union. And eventually it comes down to it. If the governments fail, and if they continue with the mess that they're doing of the negotiations, and if we are likely to come out without a deal, then eventually the House of Commons will have to assert itself and give the government a bit of direction. Not the detailed guidance, not the detailed orders that seem to be portrayed in the press and by the government itself, but a general direction so that we can try to make some sort of success of this dreadful mess that we're in.
Now, at some stage over the next few months, do you think the opposition forces, the people who are sceptical about Brexit or just downright opposed to it, are they going to manage to combine behind a single killer amendment to hold the government to account?
It's up to the Labour Party to a great extent. There are very constructive talks going on between the various parties involved, from the Greens, the SNP, Plaid, and also people from the Labour Party, Liberals, and also from the Conservatives. We're all in there talking, but occasionally there is an opportunity, as there was last week, without going into the technical matter. But we could have had a vote, we might have defeated the government, and Labour decided to put forward their own amendments, which some people couldn't support, and eventually it was just themselves that voted for themselves, and that doesn't really count in there.
Some people argue that Jeremy Corbyn, at the end of the day, is an old-time Brexiteer himself, and he's not going to put the Parliament in a position of defeating Brexit, even if it was to bring down the government.
Well, indeed, you and I know him, Alex, from many years' experience, and he's a very straight sort of a chap in many ways, and clearly he is a Brexiteer, and he's hauling his party with him. The majority of them, I think, are in favour of a soft Brexit, as soft as we can manage, but he's determined to deliver to the government what they really want, I think, which is a very hard deal. I mean, some people think back to 1981.
Join us after the break. We'll be continuing this discussion about the prospects of Brexit in Parliament, and I'll be speaking to Peter Oborne, the pro-Brexit commentator, and his assessment of whether the Prime Minister can defeat all her opponents and win through at the end of the day. Join us then. Welcome back. I'm speaking to Tommy Sheppard, the Scottish National Party frontbench spokesperson, and Hywel from Plaid Cymru, who sits on the Brexit committee. I mean, Hywel was saying that he thought that Jeremy Corbyn, in his bones and his waters, is a pro-Brexit man. But isn't it rather convenient for you to lump the blame on the Labour Party leadership? I mean, surely it takes two, or maybe more than two, to tango, and you've got to make concessions to find that killer amendment to hold the government to task.
Well, we've just got to hope that Jeremy Corbyn hates the Tories more than he hates the other social democratic parties in Europe. Maybe he'll come to that realisation. I hope so. But also it's the historic role and the constitutional role of the opposition in this parliament to oppose the government. So he has had many opportunities to do so and hasn't taken them because he's trying to square splits inside his own party. And I understand that, I accept that. But when we get to the final home straight in this long, tortuous process of the EU withdrawal bill, I think at some stage Labour has got to declare themselves as not supporting the government. And when they choose to do that in a united basis, all of us will be behind them in the lobbies on that one, and I think there will be the realistic prospect of inflicting serious wounds in the government strategy.
Now, one of your colleagues, Tommy Sheppard, last week suggested that the SNP were about to play Parnell with Westminster, a reference to Charles Stewart Parnell, who brought the Westminster Parliament to its knees in procedural terms in the 19th century in pursuit of Irish Home Rule. Is the House of Commons able to withstand an assault from the SNP on its standing orders, or have they been tightened up since the days of Parnell and you're whistling in the wind?
Well, I couldn't answer that question until we try, Alec, to be honest. But I would say this, that I think there's been a lot of people going into hyperbole about what happened last week and it being a new strategy by the SNP. Actually, what happened last week was a spontaneous and an instinctive reaction to our leader being expelled from the House of Commons. And we took the not unreasonable view that if our voices cannot be heard inside the chamber, then we will make sure that we will have them heard outside the chamber. And we actually trooped over to this very green and in the space of about 2 hours got more press coverage than we'd done in the previous year. And now the London media and the political bubble here, they know there's a problem with Brexit to do with Scotland. And
so
they didn't recognise that before.
Was that a one-off, or are you planning a strategy?
Well, as I said on the Sunday Politics, if there were to be a strategy, I'm sure one of the components of it would be an element of surprise. So I would be disinclined to talk to you about it on television. However, let me make the case that, the SNP has always taken the view that we will do anything we can and use any means at our disposal to advance the interests of the people who elected us to come to this place. Sometimes that means working the procedures even with their limitations, and other times it means making extra parliamentary protests. It's not a matter of one or the other.
Hywel Williams, finally, the Irish question, the Irish border question still seems insoluble. Do you think from the proceedings of the Brexit committee, has anyone come up with an answer that can carry support in the House of Commons?
Well, the short answer is no. And there's a complete contradiction here. In the north of Ireland, this government wants essentially an open door, and that's to comply with international treaties. But the whole rhetoric of the Leave campaign was to lock the door in Dover. Now, you can't have two sets of arrangements within one country. If I was a burglar, I'd probably go around the back and through the open back door. Just to say, generally, the two large questions which have bedeviled the Conservative Party and others over the last couple of 100 years is the Irish question and then the European question. The genius government that we have now seems to have brought the problems down both at the same time. I don't know how they manage this, but they are reaping the effects of that, unfortunately, now, and so is the rest of the UK. All countries are suffering because of it.
Well, with that fascinating insight into political history, thank you so much, Hywel Williams, and of course, Tommy Sheppard. So little sign of help from the Prime Minister from the Celtic nations. Is there a way through for Theresa May? One man who says there is Peter Oborne, the political commentator. Peter, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much.
The Prime Minister, she's like a wagon train surrounded by hostiles. She's got the House of Lords, the Brexit Committee, rebellious backbenchers, divisions in the Cabinet. The Scots are revolting, and Ireland still hasn't been solved. How can she possibly solve that Brexit conundrum?
Well, she's been doing remarkably well so far. Every commentator in the land has written her off endlessly. We've had one crisis after another where all the experts say she's about to be booted out. And actually, so far, she's, in a very difficult circumstances, done, I think, rather a smart balancing act.
But it's more than just a question of surviving. Being a Prime Minister is about leading, not just staying there. Is there any sign that she can lead this divided party in the direction she wants to go?
So far, she's done exactly that. The way I read it, and there may be other ways of doing that, but is that she's determined, and has been from the start, at navigating what in the colloquial, is called the soft Brexit. Basically, Britain will remain part of some kind of single market and some kind of customs union. And you've got to remember there are hundreds of civil servants from Europe and from Britain working industriously to make something like that happen. And in order to produce this soft Brexit, the Prime Minister has to veer between the skiller of the Remainers and the and the opposite side of the current of the Brexiteers. And every day you'll read a fresh attack on her, saying that she's finished and she can't lead. All I'd say to them is that she's still there and it's still on course.
So in a way, you're suggesting she's almost deliberately dividing her own cabinet so she can get her line through the middle, as it were.
I don't know about deliberate. It is divided, isn't it, between a small number, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove may be, although he looks a bit, kind of phrase, perfidious, if you ask me, and probably one or two others. And on the other side, you've got a bulk of a weight of Remainers, and I think she is trying to navigate a path. In my reading of her is that she, and I admire her for this. I mean, it's a very major thing, Brexit. There are car workers in the northeast of England. You want to keep them in their jobs. You want to keep those car plants going. The European market's working. She's under enormous attack from the arch Brexiteers for wanting to do a deal with Europe. I think she's actually been quite sensible.
But it's a bit of a high wire act, isn't it? I mean, at any point, the opposition could unite behind a killer amendment and then the Prime Minister's position would be untenable.
And that actually would have happened by now, in my reading of the situation, but for the fact that Labour is more committed to Brexit, or the Labour leadership, to be more exact, is more committed to Brexit than the Conservatives. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn, again and again, rather than go and kill off the government, is somehow keeping it going and enabling Brexit to carry on. That happened last week when he refused to join in the anti-government mob.
But at the end of the day, if the chance is there to topple a Prime Minister, to force an election, when the constitutional duty of the opposition leader is to want to be Prime Minister and to bring down governments.
Well, you say that, and I agree with that, and it's perfectly honourable to do that. John Smith did this kind of thing over Maastricht 25 years ago, and now Corbyn is doing the exact opposite of John Smith. He's withholding the dagger in order to keep the Brexit project afloat. That's my reading of the situation.
But there's a lot of things, not just many a slip can happen between now and the autumn. I mean, there's a huge number of unsolved questions. I mean, the can has been kicked down the road innumerable times. At some point, these matters are going to come to the touch. Is it possible for the Prime Minister to continue to postpone the evil day?
Yeah, she keeps on postponing things, and I think she may have to pay a very heavy price for that. I mean, we're just reading today that the final deal may not be negotiated until December. Now, that's 3 months before we leave the European Union. In other words, and it was originally meant to be negotiated by this month. And so there's going to be a period of chaos, and that is, I think, the moment of maximum danger for the government, when she comes back from Brussels with that final deal and it goes to the Commons, and that is when she might indeed be defeated.
So you see the Prime Minister definitely manoeuvring to come back to the Commons with a deal, but you think at that point the Commons might throw it out or try to throw it out?
Probably she will get it through, but it is obviously there are going to be honourable and principled people on both sides of the argument who are going to do what is not normal in British parliamentary politics, which is to vote against their own party on a higher principle.
Have you thought that at various times in the last 100 years, the European question and the Irish question have disabled governments of the day? Now this Prime Minister is wrestling with both simultaneously.
Yes.
How can she possibly survive that?
Well, somebody would have said this 18 months ago. They were saying it 18 months ago, 12 months ago. She has survived. I'm not certain that she's going to continue to survive, by the way, but I think she's been people are very contemptuous about this Prime Minister, and yet she's still there. It's carrying on. And the odds must be that Brexit somehow is going to take place.
Peter Oborne, it's Royal Ascot this week.
It is.
If the Prime Minister was a favourite in one of these races, would you back her to stay the course?
I think in particular in one of the long distance races, like the 2-miler later on this afternoon, I think she might manage. In those 6 furlong races, she might fail.
Peter Oborne, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex.
So here we have it, a Prime Minister surrounded on all sides by problems and difficulties, caught between the European rock and some real hard cases among the Brexiteers and indeed the Remainer MPs. Does she have, as Peter Oborne suggests, a grand strategy to divide her opponents while she comes through the middle with a soft Brexit policy? Or is the general view correct, that she actually can't make up her mind what to do, and even if she did, would probably not be able to command a majority to pursue it? We're going to find out reasonably soon, because the clock is ticking. She's been written off many times over the last year, but she's still there, she's still in office. Perhaps, however, the reason is that she's the Prime Minister that most people dislike the least. A recipe for survival, but not much of a political legacy. From Tasmina, myself and everyone here at the Alex Salmond Show, goodbye for now.